All right, now we're going to preview the Iowa Hawkeyes heading into 2024. And Dalton, you will not find a program who is more polar opposite on both sides of the ball than the Iowa Hawkeyes, man. Went 10-4 last year. Good year. They went all the way to the Big Ten championship game, lost in the Citrus Bowl to Tennessee. They did all that. They won 10 games, Dalton. They had the worst offense in America last year in terms of EPA per play and the third lowest graded offense in the FBS. You're saying, okay, how if they have the worst offense in the country, do they win 10 games? Well, they were actually one of the best defenses that we had in America. They've actually finished in the top 10 of defensive EPA per play in each of the last 4 years and should have another elite defense this year. But man, oh man, they need significant improvement on offense, especially with the no divisions now. Now it's not going to be as easy for them to make the Big Ten championship game with all these new schools coming in. They will be always because of the defense, and with Phil Parker coaching it up, one of the best defenses in America, and they give them a high floor for that. But their ceiling is always going to be limited with how bad this offense has been, and they need some serious improvement there.
Yeah, I mean, but I'll start with the fun side where you're talking, you've got studs, man, no question on defense. Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson at linebacker, Quinn Schultz and Xavier Nwankpa at safety, Sebastian Castro at corner. You lose Cooper DeJean and a couple other guys, but look, as a unit, this defense plays about as fundamentally sound as you could ask for. They're great tacklers. The starters almost never come off the field except for a few guys on the D-line. If you look at them, probably the same 14 or so guys play the entire season as long as they're healthy, right? The defense, it gives them a chance to win every week. And I think you did mention something we talked about Penn State being a huge beneficiary of the divisions going away. Iowa, it might be the biggest detriment too, right? Because you talk about how do they win? Well, they win with this defense, and they beat teams like Northwestern or Illinois or Nebraska 13-10. And they just find any which way. I think at one point they were playing, was it South Dakota State, and the game was it 4-2 or something like that? They got two safeties in that game.
Something like that.
It was something like that. The game was 4-2 or 4-3. It looked like a baseball score, but that's how they win, is they just grind you down until the very last minute, and they're going to keep making stops until they can't make any more stops. So, it is a really good defense. It's certainly a top 10 defense that gives them a floor. I don't know if it'll get them all the way to 10 wins again this year, but it gives them a chance to win every week.
It absolutely does, man. And a stat that I found was pretty funny. So of the 25 lowest graded offenses in the country last year, Iowa was the only one with a winning record. That does not happen without an elite defense. But not only a winning record, they went 10-4, right? That's a really good record. So defense is definitely, it really is the easiest strength and weakness, man. It's just biggest strength, defense, biggest weakness, offense. Because as much as the defense has dominated, Iowa has struggled just as much offensively. Over the last 3 years, they've had one of the 10 least efficient offenses in the country in terms of EPA per play. They were the worst in the country this past season. They do have some key players returning from injury on that side of the ball. And finally, a new offensive coordinator in Tim Lester after Brian Ferentz, Kirk Ferentz's son, was the offensive coordinator, and that might have been the worst nepotism that we had in college football recently with how bad he was doing there. But we had a new offensive coordinator now in Tim Lester, but it still won't be pretty, probably, on that side of the ball. But they do have a quarterback in Cade McNamara, Dalton, who got hurt last year, transfer from Michigan. What should we know about him as their starting quarterback now?
They're going to hope he just brings some sort of stability, right? When you talk about, he was supposed to be the starter last year, played a few games and tore his ACL during his fifth start. So then they went to Deacon Hill and it all, especially the Luke Lachey injury as well. The offense just went downhill from there. But what he works best as, when he was at Michigan, is a good complementary piece if you can find enough run game and enough supporting cast around him, right? Solid play action quarterback, can throw the ball over the middle. Just a 2.2% career turnover-worthy play rate, which is pretty darn good, actually. It's just that he's one of these guys that he needs a supporting cast. He needs a good offensive line. He needs some structure to work with. If you get the run game going, he's kind of the right guy to get the play action game going and get the ball to the tight ends and things like that. He's not going to do anything special. You're just not going to see freak plays, improvisation plays, and things like that. He's going to do what he does and hopefully be just a solid cog that at least brings, if nothing else, stability to a spot where, his replacement Deacon Hill went in there and had one big-time throw and 19 turnover-worthy plays. So any improvement upon that for McNamara is good, and he should at least be something stable at the position.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's a guy returning from injury. Another guy returning from injury is Luke Lachey, who had an ankle injury in the third game of the season, but he's a really, really good tight end, man, and one of the best I think we have in college football right now. Next in line at Iowa for tight ends, which has kind of been tight end because they have guys like George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, Sam Laporta, and now I think Luke Lachey is going to join that group as well. Despite being behind Laporta on the depth chart in 2022, he was still 12th among Power 5 tight ends with a 77.7 receiving grade and was 14th among that group with 22 catches that went for a first down or touchdown. Again, as a backup tight end for Iowa as well. He was one of the 20 most valuable tight ends in the country that year, according to our wins above average metric as well. So he looks to bounce back this year and kind of show more of that promise he showed 2 years ago as a starter this year. But I think it could be one of the top tight ends we have in college football, Dawn, and probably one of the top tight ends in the NFL draft as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as long as he shows he's healthy and he continues to show what he did at the end of 22, and he's a really physical player, man. I mean, I don't know if he's as physical as George Kittle, but he's got that same kind of anger that he plays with, all those Iowa tight ends play with. But I'll tell you, a guy we're going to be talking about on defense in the NFL draft next year. And we're going to be talking about several from Iowa. You know, they've got, again, a top 10, if not top 5 defense, but they've got the best slot corner in the country, man, in Sebastian Castro. And he was third among all corners in overall and coverage grade last year. You talk about just a stable player that, you know, nickel is the new base, right? You're going to have a slot corner on the field at almost all times. He's the exact guy you want, right? He can cover. He's a great zone coverage defender. He's a spectacular tackler. He makes plays on the ball, right? 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 3 picks, 7 pass breakups, just everything that you would want in this position that needs to be valued more than it is in the draft, in the league, in college. Like, look, if some sort of nickel is going to be the base defense, you need a guy like Sebastian Castro on your team. He's one of the best football players in the country. Maybe in the league he moves back to safety because he's not the best athlete in the world, but right now in college, he's the best slot corner in football. Yeah,
he's special, man. He was a first-team All-American for PFF this past season. He's a really, really good player. All right, bottom line time now, Dalton. What is the bottom line for this team? Is it going to be like the same as the past, where it's one of the worst offenses in the country but an elite defense, or do you think the offense will finally start to catch up to the defense a little bit and maybe make this team a lot better than what they've been in the past?
It's really hard to believe in it. And look, I like Luke Lachey a lot, but it doesn't feel like that's going to be enough, right? And they're going to believe, because of their defense, right, that, hey, we can stay in any game and we can squeak by just like last year, win 10 games and find ourselves in a playoff race, which is probably reasonable. Like, their defense alone probably makes them a top 25 team. But you have to score points if you're going to get a top 12. Like, I think we kind of saw it in their bowl game. They didn't have any starters out except really for Cooper DeJean. But you can't go into certain games knowing you just can't score, right? When you're playing Michigan, when you're playing Ohio State, when you're playing teams of that caliber, it felt more likely than not when they played Michigan in the Big Ten title game. They were like, they're going to get shut out. And you just can't go into some games, big games like that, right? Like thinking, oh, you know, you can't play Oregon thinking, hey, we're going to beat them 10-7. Yeah, like, no, it just doesn't work like that. And McNamara coming back, while he's probably better than Deacon Hill was, I don't see enough ceiling there. Like, this team will probably win somewhere between 7 and 9 games because their defense is great. But again, not getting to play the entire Big Ten West as it was before, and not getting to play games that are 13-10 it's really an anomaly that their offense was that bad and they won 10 games last year. It makes almost no sense when you think about, especially how football is played now. This isn't the 60s, right? I don't think with their offense they're a playoff contender. Maybe their defense, again, is just that good to have them in that race, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, they averaged 15 points per game last year, which is the second worst in the country. They only gave up 15 points per game, which is the 4th best in the country last year. I will say, Dalton, and it feels wrong saying this, there is a world where the Iowa Hawkeyes are a college football playoff team. Because I'm looking at the schedule, dude. They are at Ohio State every other game they can win. I don't see another game where, like, oh, they're going to lose that. Like, they are playing...
I don't think there are many other games, like, if you were to put them against the other 130 teams in the country, there's probably only 8 or 10 where you go, absolutely, they're going to go out there and get whacked, right? But when you have a defense like this, it's like the Penn State thing. Like, if they played Penn State, it'd be probably a tighter game than it was last year. Penn State had more offensively last year than they probably do going into this year, especially on the O-line. But, like, their defense is going to keep them in. It's like for me watching the Jets every week is what happens with this. That's kind of the same idea. But it's like, yeah, like they're not, other than the Ohio State game, they're probably not going to get whacked. But can they make it? I mean, it's hard to just, again, what was it? They were getting over-unders in their games right around 24 last year. They were setting records.
They were setting records for over-under.
And still hitting unders.
Yeah. I'm looking at it. They really, I know they're not doing divisions anymore, but they still play an easy Big Ten schedule. They play, in the Big Ten, they play Iowa State, who's a solid team. That could be a loss. They play Minnesota, Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland, Nebraska, and Ohio State. That's it. So that's manageable, man. I think there's a world here where Iowa can still win 10 or 11 games. And if you win 10 or 11 games in the Big Ten, that might be enough. I don't know. It might be, it's going to be interesting to see. You know, it could be like a Florida State situation where they deserve to be in, but the playoff committee is like, no, we can't put Iowa in. We can't put Iowa in the conference playoff. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I think there's a world, man, which is pretty funny to say, considering I don't think they're even close to being a top 12 team. But, man, this schedule, I mean, they avoid Michigan. They avoid Oregon. They avoid Penn State. They avoid USC. Like, there's a lot of teams here they avoid. I'm like, man, I don't know, man. I think they could make some noise now in the Big Ten. So we'll see with the Iowa Hawkeyes, and maybe could be a dark horse playoff team next year. Maybe worth a little bit cheddar if you're a betting man on the Iowa Hawkeyes, but they got to get a lot better offensively to do that, of course. But so we got for our preview of the Iowa Hawkeyes. We're doing this again for every single one of the 70 Power 4, Power 5 teams. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single one.